Okay, so we're going to talk about good vibes, the framework for empathy, connection, and personal development. This is a nice topic. Tell us about, you have a PhD in communication studies. Tell us your background and tell us how you ended up here. How's that?
Sure. So, well, first of all, obviously, thank you for having me on the show. I appreciate it. All right.
Thank
And
you
say
for
hello to
being
all your
here.
listeners. And then I'm a college professor at Temple University in Philadelphia. And I have a PhD in communication studies. In other words, I study how human beings interact with each other. However, one of my major expertise is the vibe, or vibes in the plural. I've been studying vibes for about 30 years. Might sound like a strange topic to people, but it's something that I've always been interested in. And at an early age, I took an intellectual interest in this thing we call the vibe. So generally speaking, I grew up in a household where everyone used the word vibe all the time and no one had to explain it. We kind of just knew what it was. Then in my late teens and early 20s, I was involved in a lot of different kind of subcultures, the rave scene, jam bands, underground house parties, things like that. And everyone in these scenes, in these subcultures, used the word vibe, including myself. So the vibe of the band, the vibe of the DJ, the vibe on the dance floor, my own personal vibe, etc. But at some point, I realized that although we're all using this word, no one's trying to define it or explain it. And so I started to think about this really at the age of 19 or 20 and wrote my first paper on the vibe in a college class on nonverbal communication. I then went to grad school and used my master's thesis and my PhD or my doctoral dissertation to write about the vibe and create my own philosophy of the vibe referred to as bodily emanation. In other words, the body radiates or emanates an actual tangible feeling that is felt and experienced by other bodies. And then from that point forward, over the next 20 years or so, I would go back and forth by studying the vibe or doing other things, etc. In the past few years, though, I'm back to the vibe and try to create a new project I call the 20-minute vibe. Right? In other words, I take it upon myself to help other people articulate their experience and their ideas about vibes. So how might we turn a feeling into an idea and then turn an idea into a practice? And how might you practice that on a daily basis? So for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, or hence for 20 minutes a day. So a 20-minute vibe, right? Trying to share my knowledge with people in ways that are accessible and short chunks of time. So a short essay, a short video, uh, on class or online lecture, small group workshops, things like that. So that's kind of the very brief background of how I got to this point.
Yeah, and you have proposed how might health coaches use the common terminology of vibes as a framework for building empathy and connection with their clients, and how can coaches establish better vibes with their clients, and how can they help their clients create better vibes for themselves? I think that's a very thoughtful summary and nice to talk about. Um, we talk about vibes, and I think about bad vibes. Yeah, can you get bad vibes from somebody literally?
Oh, yeah, of course, yes. So there's a common saying in our society, good vibes only. And I understand why we say that. Like, who wants bad vibes, right? But
Hmm.
if we're honest with ourselves, there are all kinds of vibes, good vibes, bad vibes, chill vibes, happy vibes, etc. And so bad vibes are a real thing. And I don't think we should act like they don't happen, right? So the question then becomes, how do we negotiate bad vibes when we encounter them, right? So it's
Right.
really an issue of not learning not to absorb and focus on the negative vibes, right? So if a bad vibe is happening between you and another person, observe it, acknowledge it, and then find a way to let it go. Don't let it ruin your day, so to speak. So bad vibes are a real thing. They're not necessarily bad. It's just the issue of learning how to deal with them.
Yeah, is it okay to have bad vibes and to continue on? Or if you get bad vibes, are you better off just running the other direction? Depends on
That's a
how
good
bad the
question.
vibes are, right?
Right, right. And I guess you can look at this from two different ways, right? Am I the person giving off the bad vibe, or am I getting bad vibes from someone else? And so let's break it down piece by piece, right? Every human being at some point in time is going to give off a bad vibe. You're in a bad mood, and that's what happens, right? And this doesn't make you a bad person, it's being human, right? Now, having said that, it's instructive to be mindful and be aware of the vibe you're giving off, right? And if you have a good reason to give off a bad vibe, fine. A lot of times, though, we do it subconsciously and without reflection. So being aware of who you are, being aware of your situation, being aware of the vibe you're giving off gives you more control over what you're putting out into the world. Now, on the other side, when we encounter bad vibes, one of the things to think about is, well, if I'm in a situation and all of a sudden I feel agitated or anxious or upset about something, then take inventory of what's going on around me and is there something obvious that's bothering me, or is it really just someone's presence that's bothering me in some kind of way? right? If it's overt behavior, then you know what it is and you kind of disengage or move on or call it out, whatever you want to do. But if it's something more subtle than that, then you realize there's something happening with this other person that might be a sign that something is happening. It might be a threat, it might be a form of aggression, something bad might happen in a moment from now. And in that situation, be more reflective, be more mindful, and then if you need to, leave the situation, if you can do that. Obviously, if it's a work situation, you can't leave the office or something like that. That's possible. If that's the case, though, go to the restroom, take a walk around the corner, right? Something like that. Try to exit the situation, reground yourself, and then regroup.
Now, and for a coach, maybe bad vibes would be a reflection of something that the other person is experiencing. It might be a clue to what they need to work with, right?
Oh, 100%, yes, right? So in a coaching situation, presumably you are kind of in the space with that person. You are attuned to their emotional state, their psychological state, their wants and needs. And it's really about learning how to distinguish between your vibe and the vibe of the other person. And that's not always easy for people, right? Because they're kind of enmeshed, right? But like be staying grounded in yourself, being aware of your own mindset, and then being aware of what your client needs, right? And if they're giving off a bad vibe, then that's a chance for you to kind of navigate, investigate, figure out what is bothering that person, right? And then try to elevate that person to a higher level, right? How do you kind of help that person release their negative vibes? That way they can be more self-assured, happier, more joyful, etc.
Now I have a question. My granddaughter is going to be really embarrassed that I asked you this. She has great vibes. Every place we go, people say she has such a beautiful spirit and she makes people feel happier. Can we cultivate vibes? I mean, if I wanted to have vibes like she has.
The quick answer is yes, you can. Again, it's not easy. I don't want to sell people a quick fix here. That's not how it works. And when we think about vibe or energy or presence, anything like that, it really is kind of the whole person coming to the forefront, right? And so if you want to cultivate a better vibe, a happier vibe on a regular basis, you can do that, right? So one, be self-reflective, be mindful of the baseline of your everyday vibe, right? Then from there, try to set your intention, right? What do I want to change? What do I want to do? What do I want to accomplish? What kind of person do I want to be? Or at least, what kind of presence do I want to emanate out to the world? And then from there, like experiment and practice, right? So all learning is really a process of experimentation, right? And if you're learning to change your personality, if you're learning to change your everyday vibe, it will take some time, right? And one of the ways you might do that is pick certain situations to experiment with the vibes you're giving off, right? So, for example, maybe you go to the coffee shop, or you go to the grocery store, or you go to wherever you practice your religion, right? But in certain kind of specific situations. And so, over the next hour or so, I will try to emanate this kind of vibe, and then see how people respond to you, right? If you get the response that you're looking for, then you're on the right track. If by chance you're not getting the right response, that's fine. That's okay. Next time, though, try a different kind of vibe or a different kind of orientation and approach. And really, it just takes give yourself enough time to experiment with these different personalities slash vibes and see what works best for you.
Okay, so that tells us what we can do to elevate our own vibes. What can we do to help our clients bring their vibes up?
Right. Well, actually, I'll walk through a few steps here, right? Kind of what I tell lots of people here. So, first, be aware of your own body and space. How are you feeling, right? Internally, emotionally, psychologically, etc., physically, even, right? Then from there, be aware of your surroundings, right? What's going on around you. In this case, probably with your client of some sorts, right? And I say these first two things because if you're just in your head all the time, you're not opening yourself up to this exchange of energy and these vibes, right? Then from there, though, try to soften your perception and soften your ego. And I say that because you want to allow your subconscious mind to communicate with your conscious mind, right? If we're too focused on our attention in a very specific manner, we're cutting ourselves off to this exchange of energy, right? Then from there, though, try to imagine or envision your body radiating a certain kind of connection that literally is connected to your client. And then from there, like trying to quote unquote lean into it and engage this exchange. And then from there, learn to read the vibe of the other person, but also then, and here's the trick, is to direct that vibe of the other person. right? How do you elevate? How do you move? How do you influence in a way that is nurturing and supportive of the other person, right? And really about, I think all good coaching is really about sharing a certain mindset with your clients, right? And then learning to direct them in subtle kinds of ways. Now, sometimes it's very explicit in terms of what you say, but also in terms of your body language, your nonverbal communication, your facial expressions, but also your basic presence, right? How do you open up your presence to this person to allow them to be the best person they can be? Now, having said all of that, you can just ask the person, what's your vibe today? How you feeling today? Okay, well, likewise, what kind of vibe do you want from me today so I can be here for you? What are your wants and needs right now, right? And how can I, manipulate or alter my vibe and my energy to meet your needs right here, right?
I can just see somebody reacting to that. How can I manipulate your vibes?
I didn't mean it negative way. I didn't mean when I said it, I knew how it came out. I apologize. That wasn't what I was trying to say, right? But how do you, help guide other people's vibes? I guess is a better way to phrase it.
Oh, you know what? And sometimes just by, well, I see Sakura when she goes around people and she's got such a high vibe, she makes people around her happy, and you can do that. You can just spread just by being happy, you can make other people happy. And then
Sure. Yeah.
by making other people happy with themselves, you can make them happy, right?
Yes. Correct. It's almost a form of contagion. I mean that in a positive way, right? Um, Positive vibes and good vibes, and even bad vibes, but nonetheless, vibes in general are contagious, right? It's a subtle kind of influence we have on each other. So think of not just your vibe or the vibe of another person, but think of it as a collective phenomenon, right? So I'll go in reverse. So like on a large scale, think of a musical concert or a sporting event where there's thousands of people, right? And we all have the same focus on the music or on the game, whatever it is. And then you feel that collective energy, you feel that collective vibe. You might think of it as a form of electricity, like at a sporting event. Like we win the big game, everyone's yelling and cheering, etc. Like you
Yeah.
feel that physically, right? Now scale that back down though to the one-on-one situation, right? It's the same phenomenon, simply on a smaller scale. But
Mhm.
as a coach, though, it becomes your responsibility to again guide or navigate that relationship, that collective vibe, right? And one of the ways I would recommend doing this, really for all people, but in particular with coaches, is trying to be your true self and be your authentic self, right? And that usually comes with a certain kind of happiness, a certain kind of joy that other people pick up on, right? So I would invite your listeners to think about who is the most authentic person that they know, right? And how does that authentic person make you feel? It's usually pretty inviting, right? And so
Sometimes,
then well,
sometimes.
yeah, I mean, you can, again, I'm trying to be positive here. Like you can be authentically a bad person, right? That is true. I want to acknowledge that. That's 100%, right? But generally speaking, though, I like to see the good in people, and I like to think deep down, most of us, not all of us, but most of us are generally good people, right? And sometimes though we get in the way of ourselves. In other words, we're not allowing ourselves to be our true selves. We're not allowing ourselves to be our authentic selves. And if that's the case for a coach, if you're not your authentic self as a coach, right, then how can you ask your client to be authentic?
Yeah, right.
And again, though, unfortunately, we live in a society that often doesn't want us to be authentic. It says it does, but it doesn't, right? We have all kinds of rules, social norms that exclude people, that marginalize people, etc., as opposed to just being ourselves, right? Now, again, I want to clarify: being yourself, just because you're yourself doesn't mean you're a good person. I'm trying to be politically correct here in my language I'm using, but I think we understand what I'm getting at,
Yeah.
right? So keep that in mind. I think that's important as well.
Some of us have a habit of walking into a room and picking up the feelings of everybody else. How can we avoid taking all that in if there's negative vibes around us? Or if say we're spending all day, we've got four people to coach during the day and they're all having problems. How do you keep from taking that all home with you?
It's not easy, and I have to admit that I'm still learning how to do this myself properly, let's say. I learned in the past few years that I'm an empath, which simply means that I feel the world more deeply than other people, which is probably why I've been studying vibes for 30 years. Is probably the reason why I do this, right? Having said all of that, for me, I try to evoke certain kinds of visual metaphors that help me psychologically avoid negative vibes and not to internalize. So, for example, suiting up, for instance. So, imagine I'm wearing a rubber suit and the vibes either bounce off of me or they kind of glide past my body. right? So I'm present, I'm aware, I'm mindful, but I'm not internalizing what's happening before me. Now, that metaphor doesn't work for everyone. Some people like a suit of armor. Some people like a force field. Some people like to think they're a mirror and they just reflect back to the person, etc. But find some visual metaphor that works for you, right? That allows you to be present, allows you to observe, but not to internalize. And again, this is not necessarily easy for most people. And again, I still struggle with myself, despite what I study and what I do with my life, right? Um, Now, let's say between sessions, though, one thing that I find helpful is learning to ground or release my energy, right? So I've been sitting in class, or I've been doing a workshop, or I've been doing a speech, and like literally, it's pretty intense. It's very present, all those vibes, right? And then when I'm done or I have a break, I try to exit the situation, and then try to like visually ground my feet wherever I'm at, right, and release that energy, or let it, emanate from my shoulders or my head, etc. But find some way to release that into the world and let the world kind of just digest that for yourself.
That would take some practice.
Yes, it does. I'm glad you said that, right? Because a lot of people talk about vibes, make it seem like a quick fix, and like you just snap your fingers and it works. And that's not how it is. At least that's not my experience, right?
Yeah.
If you're serious about vibes and serious about the exchange of energy, it really is about a practice that you have to do on a regular basis, like anything else. If I want to learn a new language, I can't learn it overnight. It might take weeks, months, or years to learn a language. Well, think of vibes as another kind of language, another mode of communication, right? And how do we learn about and develop that mode of communication or that alternative language?
Do you teach a class in this?
Not at Temple University, no. I don't get paid at Temple to teach classes about vibes, right?
Oh.
Um,
I was going to say what major that would go into.
but I do workshops, one-on-one sessions, things like that. On my website, I have two self-paced video courses that walk through different kinds of vibes and whatnot. And so the short answer is not at Temple, but yes, I do teach about this kind of stuff, right? The challenge for me, though, over the years is that I really am, and I don't mean this in any way of a form of arrogance, but I'm an intellectual. That's how I move through the world, right? And so I often start off the abstract, but most people aren't like that. They want the more concrete and practical help, right? And so for me, that's a struggle, but that's something I've developed over the years. Like, what are some practical things that people can do, which is what we've been talking about. It's like practice rather than just theorizing and thinking about it.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that you were an intellectual. I talked to somebody last week she has every degree and advanced degree in psychology and forensic psychology from all these places in the UK. And she told me she was not book learned.
That's not
But
possible.
no, no, I thought that was funny though, but I think what she meant was that she went beyond what she learned in the books.
Oh, okay, 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 okay.
It just sounded funny, and I keep going back to that because yeah, an intellectual is, and then talking about vibes. What is one bit of vibe advice that you would give to us who are listening to you here right now? Is there something really important that we should know?
Mm. I guess in many ways it's a summary of some of the things I've already discussed, right? So when I think about trying to be your authentic self and then cultivating your authentic vibe, so you're more open to your clients and to people in general. Two, recognizing that bad vibes do exist and bad vibes are not necessarily bad, they're just part of being human. And then three, though, learning to not internalize the vibes of other people. I don't mean just bad vibes, but intense vibes, sad vibes, depressive vibes, things like that. Because if you internalize other people's vibes all the time and don't release them, right, that will wear on you mentally, emotionally, and physically. Right? There's no doubt about that. I mean, we store stress in our bodies, we store negative emotions in our bodies, and one could theorize that we store negative vibes or vibes in general in our bodies, right? And so learning to release that, go out into nature, go for a walk, space out for a while, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But again, think about vibes as an ongoing practice that you experiment with and you learn about, as opposed to it's like, well, I'll just say it and make it happen. That's not how the real world works. It's just not how we're built.
You know what? That brings me to this. We talked about cultivating vibes, and you talk about getting back into nature and maybe letting things happen a little bit more naturally. Do you do better when you let things evolve naturally than when you try to regulate it or guide it?
So just to clarify, so you're asking, do I do better, let's say, in life or in a situation if I kind of let it happen as opposed to forcing it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's well said. That was a good
Yeah.
way
I
to
mean,
ask the
so
question.
um, yes and no. The quick answer is yes, and I think that's true probably for most people, but that itself is a learned behavior, right? So I guess to use an analogy here, so if you're a musician and you're on stage and you find yourself being able to let go and be present with the audience and crowd, and you're kind of in the moment playing the best you can, that's what everyone strives for. But it took you years and years to get to that point, right? No one is born knowing how to play the electric guitar or drums. You have to practice literally for years to be able to let yourself go and be in the moment, right? So now we're talking about the notion of flow, like being present and where your subjectivity and the activity you're performing become a single process, right? And me personally, that's how I try to live my life. Although I fail on a daily basis, that's just a given. Like I fail all the time, but that's part of the process. That like
Mhm.
as I practice trying to achieve my flow,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
At certain points I achieve it, other points I do not. Does
Great.
that make sense?
It does. It makes sense. Thank you. So you have a book, The 20-Minute Vibe
No, it is not a book, it's a website. It's called
website,
20minutevibe.com. Although I am working on a current book right now
right?
about the vibe that'll be out, hopefully next year and a half, something like that. But right now it's just a website.
If you vibe right, right. You get
Trying to vibe on this book here. We'll see how it goes.
Okay, so we should go to your website, 20minutevibe.com, to get more information, and we'll put that underneath the show notes. And you have a course called the 20minutevibe.teachable.com, right?
There's actually that's a third party website, and I have right now two courses on there, self-paced video courses. One is basically an introduction overview of the vibe, like what it is, how to feel it, etc. And the other one's actually on the sports vibe. So I was trying to find an example or a case study that's accessible to people, and so trying to view the phenomenon of sports, particularly as a fan, as well as an athlete or coach, through the lens of the vibe, right? So if you are a fan, or if you are an athlete, or if you are a coach, how does the vibe play into your experience of sports? In so many ways, again, it's about the vibe, but using sports as a way to introduce these concepts and practices.
My son's in England. He's a hockey player. He's a nuclear physicist, and he's a coach. I'll have him do the sports one.
Awesome.
He'll enjoy that one.
He sounds well rounded, that's for sure.
Yeah, he definitely is well rounded. Okay, I've enjoyed your vibe today. Thank you for being here with me.
Thank you.
Uh,
Appreciate it.